Welcome to Inspire Me with Jay, a podcast focusing on meditation, the near-death experience, and all things spiritual. Please like, subscribe to this channel, and share everywhere. Thank you. Hello, this is Inspire Me with Jay. I'm Jay Spillers. I have a guest today, Glen Williams. Glen, how are you?
Doing very well, Jay, and thanks for the opportunity to be here with you.
So why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I'm a retired police officer, detective that spent 26 years. During the time, I saw a lot of things that that were traumatic, basically, and that ripped me up, and I kind of ruined my life. I ended up divorced because of some of the behaviors brought on by PTSD, or that were symptomatic of PTSD, is a better way to put it. And after my divorce, I'm a slow learner, so I tried it again, and I ended up with the same result. I quit talking, didn't share anything, and after the second divorce, I spent 3 years at my cabin where I got back in touch with who I really am. And that was a learning process. But through that, I ended up changing me back to who I really am. I wrote a class to help other police officers not do the same stupid things that I did. And I wrote a book called Bridging the Gap. And it's about bridging the gaps that we create in our lives, in our relationships.
Mm-hmm. So what lessons did you learn that helped you overcome PTSD and trauma?
Well, my process, I actually started with a little training program on getting back in touch with ourselves. Self-accountability is huge. Some of the healing things that I used, nature is a huge healer. And first off, I started with the symptoms of things that PTSD had created. I was living by myself at my cabin. I drove 57 miles to work, so I would get up at 3:30 in the morning to get ready to go to work. I would get home about 5 or 6 if I didn't have to work overtime. And all I did at that time is I came home and I mixed myself a drink and I made dinner and I went to bed. Now, I was smart at the time because I only made it 2 drinks, but I was not so smart because each of those drinks was about 34 ounces each. And so I was not feeling any pain. Yeah, I was numb. I was having nightmares and things of some of the things that I had seen. And I was working through those things. First thing that I started was communication. Back then, if I talked about it at work and I asked for help, then they would let us go because we were unfit for duty. So I found a therapist and I went on my own and I started talking with her. And then I have another friend of mine who's a counselor, and I started talking with her and letting some of these things out. In fact, I was a 17-year officer before I ever admitted I had a problem, that something was wrong. I had a case where I went to work in the morning about 6 o'clock, and I got there and got a call out on a missing child. And we went through, I went over the apartment complex, and as I pulled in, there was a water fountain there, and it had bubbles flowing over. Teenage kids had put in a bunch of soap suds, and it had 10-foot-high bubbles and flowing over. You couldn't even see the fountain. It was onto the pavement. We went to the apartment and searched, and they called the little kid. He was 3 years old. They called him Little Houdini because he could escape from anything. They'd even put extra locks on the door, and he was still gone. We searched the house first because 80% of the time that's where the child is found. And then when he wasn't there, we found out where his favorite playground was, where his friends lived, where he'd like to go with his mom. And we searched all those areas, and we gathered by that fountain after about 45 minutes trying to figure out what was going on and where else to look. And as we were standing there, a little breeze just kind of parted some of those bubbles just enough that we saw a foot in the water, a shoe. And we reached in, grabbed him. I did CPR on him until fire department got there. And I held it together because that's what we do. Got to be professional. And we let it, they took him up to the hospital, but as we were still there before we even left, they found out that he had not made it. And when it's the children, it's crushing. But I had a really good leader that day. He looked at me and he says, "Are you okay, brother?" And for the first time in my career, 17 years, I looked at him and I said, "No, I am not okay." And so that's first step, is you got to admit when there's a problem. He says, "You know what? Take care of yourself. Don't worry about your report till you're done." I went and found a church parking block, a few blocks away, and I pulled in there and backed up against a brick wall, and I just sat there and I bawled my eyes out for about an hour. And that's probably the first time I'd ever really showed emotion about anything either, because I had blocked it all off. Anyway, so coming back to, that's the first admission, and you have to admit that there is a problem. I went up to my cabin and I proceeded in healing. First off, I wrote everything down. I started writing things down. They call it journaling because that lets the mind know it's okay to let it out, and I don't have to share it with anybody. And then I got in touch with nature, and I started hiking through the woods, and I hiked because I lived in the aspens and the pines. And I mean, I had moose in my front yard, and I started enjoying those things again, getting back in touch with me again. And even in the winter, I went and bought snowshoes and just crunched through the snow. I started changing habits. Instead of going to work and coming home and getting drunk or feeling no pain, I would didn't want to drive the 11 miles back to town. So I threw my gym bag in my car. I stopped at the gym on the way home in town. And then I came home and I ate and I went to bed and got ready for the next day. So I started changing the habits. Nature's an awesome healer. I talked to my counselor friend and started opening up about things that I had never said to either one of my first wives. And because we were just taught, when I was in the police academy, it was funny. They had our spouses come in and they said, law enforcement has a very high divorce rate. You're going to see things you don't want to share because they're so gruesome. And you're going to see things that you can't share because it's an ongoing investigation. But keep the communication open with your spouse so that you don't get divorced. And after 4 hours, we walked out and we're all going, and, okay, great. How do we do it? And it took me 25 years, but I figured it out. And that's one of the things when I teach my class today to law enforcement that I share with how to do that so that we don't re-traumatize our spouse, but we can keep that line of communication open. And again, like I say, nature was a start. And then I started trying some outside the box things. I did EMDR, which is accepted now as standard for PTSD treatment. When I did it, it was brand new. It was experimental. They weren't sure, but it works. And then I got into sound. Tibetan bowls or singing bowls, the vibrations and the tones will affect you physically and emotionally. And those type of things. There are other things that, back as an officer, I'd hear a drum circle and I think, oh, a bunch of tie-dye dressed hippies and smoking dope and dancing around a fire. And that was not actually the case, especially now they have shaman-led healing circles. And so those are things to work out at. Meditation's huge. And there are so many ways to meditate. You can get some soft music and just be by yourself somewhere and meditate. It's not all orange robes and kumbaya stuff, which is what most people think of when they think of meditation. But there are certain intonations and things that draw you into a peaceful place. I just do it with music that I enjoy, and I don't do it when I'm driving, obviously, but sometimes it's hard not to because I love to listen to music as I drive. But I just find certain tones that mean things to me. So, there's a whole enumeration of ways to go through those things, but it's all about self-care, because if you're not okay, you can't help anybody else.
What is EMDR?
Another thing is it's eye movement desensitization, and I can't remember what the R stands for now, but it's a movement of the eyes. and it basically connects both sides of your brain and gets you thinking about things in a little different manner.
Is that like a 5-minute exercise, or how long does it usually take?
Yeah, it does not take long. I have a couple that my counselor friend gave to me, and I can do it in 3 to 6 minutes. Some of them, depending on how deep you want to go, are longer. But those you do with somebody that is trained in it and knows how to do it, and then they get you through, and they do talk to you a little bit throughout it. I have a couple that she gave me that take about 3 or 4 minutes that I can do just on my own, just to settle me, almost like a meditation, to get me back in the zone where I want to be.
So that's kind of almost like a hypnotic effect too.
It
like
can, yeah. Not really. You don't go under, but yeah, it can. And when you do the longer one with the therapist, it does that, but it changes the way you see things, and it changes the way they affect you. It's kind of weird, but yeah, it works. And so that it's probably a beginning stage of the hypnosis type thing.
So do you meditate every day?
Not every day. I wait till I start to get a little antsy or a little tense, and when things are starting to build up, and then I'll set aside some time to go meditate. Another meditation type, then this is what I do very often, is massage. If you go in and you're not planning on talking to the massage therapist, and you just you feel the massage and you feel everything that's going, that's another great way where a lot of people fall asleep, but in reality, they're not completely asleep. So it is a meditative state.
And so, like you said, the bowls help too, because I've had the guest on that does the bowls, and has the rhythmic sound, things like that.
Yeah, that's my favorite. That one is my favorite way to do it. One of my counselor friends does that, and that's where I learned about it. And I have gone into almost a trance when I've been there. I've seen things. And when I come out, I'm just calm and relaxed, and it's just amazing. And so, yeah, that one is probably my favorite.
And so do you do like a combination of different things every day?
I'm sorry?
Do you do a combination of these different activities every day?
I do a combination. Like I say, I do not do them every day. Like the other day, I had to drive 12 hours to get to where I'm at now. And so that day I didn't do anything. But the next day I definitely went and got a massage because my hips were hurting. And I just kind of let things go. And since I've been here, I've done a book signing. I did a talk. I was on an interview on the TV, radio. And so I've been extremely busy. But in that time, I've meditated those 3 days once. And I have done a little music therapy a couple times. So yeah, probably I usually do it about every 2 to 3 days, probably. And that's kind of where I'm at.
And so have you had like realizations as you do some of these things, like meditation or, through the EMDR or EMDR?
Yeah, one day, I've had some really cool experiences. When I was up in my cabin one morning, I just woke up at 6 o'clock. I don't know, it was a day off, and I woke up at 6 o'clock, and I had ideas just floating into my head, and I grabbed a notebook and pen, started writing, and I wrote for about 4 hours. And I don't know where that came from. I didn't even know what I wrote. I had to go back and reread it, and I couldn't read half of it because I was writing so fast. But I went and talked to my counselor friend, and I had been talking about putting a class together for law enforcement to help work through the PTSD issues. And I read it to her, and she said, "Wow, you're 60% done. Now finish it." So in 4 hours, it just spoon-fed to me. Yeah. And then one day I was doing a Tibetan bowl or a singing bowl session, and I had a vision, and I'm lucky I got a third chance. I changed me, and that was the key part. I changed me, and I got a third chance at a relationship. So I have a wonderful relationship with a great lady. She knows everything. We have no secrets. Communication is number one thing. But we were dating at the time, and I said, what do you think about Phoenix or St. George, Utah? And she says, why? I said, I saw red rocks. I have no idea where they're at, but I saw red rocks, and that's where we're going to be. And she looked at me and she says, well, what do you think about Hurricane? And I said, where? And Hurricane is a town outside of St. George, Utah. And she goes, well, I have a lot there. I said, that's okay. I don't know. And so we went down there. She took me to that lot, and I stood there in that lot, and in the backyard were the red rocks I had seen in my, I guess, vision, for lack of a better word. But as I was going through the MDR, I had seen these red rocks, and there they were right in my backyard. So we built a home there. And I just knew, yeah, there's strange things that happen, but for them to happen, we have to be open to it.
Yeah, I actually lived in St. George for several years, and I lived in Hurricane for a few months, and I lived in Cedar City. My parents lived in Cedar City before they passed, so I'm actually pretty familiar with that whole area.
Okay, awesome.
Is that where you live now?
No, we actually moved.
You live in St. George? Oh.
No, we moved up to closer to Salt Lake to be closer to the kids. And then the kids all left. So now we have a child in every time zone. And I actually live just south of Provo in a small town there where it's nice and quiet and peaceful, which is what I like. In fact, I live in Springville. So
do all of these, oh, go ahead.
No, that's fine. Do all of these.
Yeah, do all of these things that you do, the meditation, the bowls, do they have a spiritual significance for you? Are you a spiritual person?
Yes, I am. I've had some experiences where I could have been severely injured or killed, and somehow I was not, and it was nothing that I did. So I know that there are definitely spiritual connections, and if you want to call him God or whatever, I know there is somebody up there. I call him God, or him or her. I don't know, but they call the whatever God. And so I know there's spiritual connections, and I also know that if we pay attention, it's, people call it a gut feeling, or you just get these promptings. And I know that as we open ourselves up enough, we follow those things, it's amazing what happens in our lives. I had one time when I was a new officer, I had 3 major cases in 10 days. And one of them I was actually there was a hit and run accident in the north part of the city, and I was working in the south. And it was about 11 o'clock in the morning, serious injuries, and the suspect car was seen going northbound out of the city. And at 11:30, I'm walking to go to lunch in with some buddies, and then something said, go out to the street. And I actually listened for once in my life. I listened, I went out, so I'll be right back. I got my car, went to the street, turned right, was sitting at a stop light. And all of a sudden from my left, here came the suspect vehicle. It turned left, went in front of me. I pulled it over. The people that backed me up on it were the chief of police and the detectives, lieutenant over detectives, and they helped me pull him over. I still had stitches in my knee from a case a couple days earlier where I had chased a guy up in the mountains, got him and got out of there safely. I mean, it was an amazing week. So the chief says, wow, you sure seem to be in the right place at the right time lately. And 3 weeks later, I ended up in detectives. I had no clue why or how. And that was kind of unheard of, but yeah, because I listened at that time. And it was amazing if you follow those promptings. But that's one thing that we, as people, get up in our head and it says, no, that won't work because, or you shouldn't do that because, or try it this way because it worked better, when it really doesn't. And so if we are open, and that's what I like about these processes, the bowls open me up and I get to be vulnerable, and they make me more receptive to these outside things. And they're outside the box. And that's what people in life now are afraid to be, outside the box. And they don't realize the box is what we create around ourselves, supposedly to protect us, but in reality, it holds us in. And we don't get to blame that on anybody else. But by doing some of these processes, meditation opens up the mind, opens up your being. The Tibetan bowls, that's what really does it for me. Drum circles do that, and I try to go about once a month to a drum circle. It usually ends up being about every other month, but the tones and the vibrations are the things that open us up, and it's amazing. Say the EMDR, that's what it does. It gets both sides of the mind together, or not together, but into both sides of your mind, because most of us are right-brained or left-brained, depending on a lot of variables in our heredity. But when you can get both in touch, the thought processes are just amazing.
So do you have like one-on-one sessions with people, teaching them some of the things you've learned?
The bowl sessions, yes, I do one-on-one with those. The drum circles are usually a group, but I have a relationship with the shaman that leads those. And so we've actually done some small sessions where we've got up in the mountains and found a cabin and, 4 or 5 people, and just enjoy and learn and discuss and things. So there are all kinds of options. Obviously, my meditation or massage meditation is what I call it, is one-on-one with the massage therapist, or if it's just wanting to do meditation, that's just me. And that one's sometimes hard, especially if you have family, but a good way to do that is I like to go up in the woods, and I'll just go for a quiet walk, or I'll even just hunker down in one small place and just sit there and let things be. When you get so in tune, you can hear the rustle in the aspen leaves as the breeze blows through them, and then you can start hearing other things, and then you know that you're open.
Like when you have someone that comes and they say they're stressed, and maybe they feel like they have PTSD, where do you usually point them first? Because you have like a variety of techniques you can plug into, but like where do you usually point to someone first in terms of where do you start?
Well, the first thing is, if they're coming to me, that's a good sign, because they're identifying, yeah, I've got a problem here, and that's step one. Then after talking with him, it just depends. My first step on dealing with a couple of things was going to a therapist. And I was really inside the Western box then. And so that's probably where I would start, or I would start with somebody that they trust, that they can talk to. And if that's me, that's great, because if you don't get these things out, they will eat you alive. I used to have 4 or 5 nightmares a month, and now I'm down maybe 1 or 2 a year. And it never goes away. It's not a cure. You're never cured from PTSD. But it's an ongoing process that you can learn to handle. So yeah, I would refer them to somebody to talk with starting, and then I would refer them probably to a therapist. And I really love the EMDR. So my counselor friend that does the EMDR, I like to refer people to her. I have another friend that is a counselor in Colorado, and anybody out there, I'll refer to her, because she's dynamite on those things. So there are people around that get it and that do these things very well. And that's where I would probably start people, because I am not a trained counselor. I can listen, I can be a friend, but I am not licensed to go do medical care. And I don't know that I want that. So I would start with a counselor or therapist. Once they're talking, that's the biggest issue, is to get them open, because we are taught, and I was taught as a young man, a young kid, I'm a guy, I got this, I don't need help. I can handle everything. And guess what? We can't handle everything by ourselves. And so you find those specific needs, and that's where the therapist would come in, is those specific needs. And I would try to find one that is not so locked into the Western therapy sessions that they're afraid to look at some of the outside things. And that's where I would start and let them make those recommendations. On the other hand, I would go and just try some things too. Like I say, the Tibetan bowls or the singing bowls, that's my favorite. And I think that one opens me up way more than any of the others. The EMDR was a huge start to that. And so with PTSD, I would find somebody that does EMDR. Now there's a whole bunch of other drug-related treatments too that I've not tried, like ketamine and things like that. Those kind of scare me a little bit. But my son was blown up in Afghanistan. He's got PTSD really bad. And I can't say really bad, but he has some really heavy symptoms, because PTSD, no matter what the instigating events are, is PTSD. And so, it could be the housewife up the street she has her dog that's 14 years old. She sees to get hit by a car. And so she suffers trauma from that. Or it could be me with 26 years of dead kids and bloody scenes and watching people get hit by trains and things like that. Or my son, who was almost blown up 3 times in Afghanistan, was in 3 firefights a day, actually, for about 6 months, and things like that. But those are all instigating events, but the end result is the same. And so, and that's what I've discovered after COVID. Wow, everybody has trauma in their life. Everybody. And so that's what I would first off get them, see if they can open up about it, and start with journaling, because it's okay. You don't have to share that with anybody. Start that. That opens up your mind, though, and lets it know it's okay to let it out. And then find somebody you trust to start sharing it verbally. And if you want to just go read what you wrote, that's fine. But that's a great start. And then as you go through, I would find seriously a counselor, a therapist, and it may take you a while to find one that you trust, because not every counselor is for every person. And not every person that you talk to, you're not going to want to share with. You're going to pick and choose, and that's your option. And I would heavily use that. I have walked away from people that I started working with, and I just didn't like the way they handled me. And that's where I get that choice. But I would not shut myself down ever again. And then, like I say, there's people in every city I know that do some of these things. It's becoming more and more well known. And I would try like some of the Tibetan bowl things. The EMDR, or rapid eye movement, is another name for it. And those type of things. And as you work through, so it's hard for me to refer to anybody. Number one, I don't know where people are at. I don't know exactly physically. I don't know where they're at. And I also don't know where they're at mentally. But those are the suggestions I would offer. Number one, let's find somebody. And I can give a couple of names. I'd have to look them up, of people that I've worked with that work for me. That doesn't mean they'll work for that person, though.
Do you work primarily with law enforcement and military who have PTSD a lot? Or?
That's who I speak to mostly. But after COVID, I've discovered I've got to branch out, especially in today's world where both are underfunded, both are understaffed. It's really hard to get groups together. And so that makes it difficult. But I still go, whether I have 2 people or 30 people, it doesn't matter, because we change the world one person at a time. And that's by assisting them in finding ways to assist themselves.
So were you inspired to write your book?
Yeah, I believe I was. I know my program was inspired. I know it was because of the way it happened. And that's actually what led to the book. And yeah, my whole objective is I'm retired, but I'm not done making a difference. And if I can just help one person work through PTSD, not get divorced, not commit suicide, then I still win. And I'm still making a difference. And that's my entire goal in life. I've talked with, I spoke last year at the National Homeland Security Conference, and that was another experience because I have an 8-hour course and a 4-hour course that I teach, and they wanted me to do a 1-hour keynote. So now I have a 1-hour keynote. I wrote that on the plane out there, and I have kept in touch with. There are probably 40 people in the audience, and I've kept in touch with probably 4 or 5 of them since then. And it's nice to be able to just call up and say, "Hey, how you doing, brother or sister?" But because there were some women in there too, and it was, and I got great feedback. I loved it, but the feedback I got, I was just going, "Wow, I said something that worked. Somebody got it." And so I keep in touch with a few people that have chosen to keep in touch with me, and we go back and forth a little bit, and they ask some of these similar questions. And I have one guy's in New York and one's in Texas, and there's a gal in Illinois. So we're working our way slowly across the country.
Was it really hard in the summer of 2020 for a lot of police adding extra stress because there was so much going on with the, like the riots and protests, and it was like so bad, anti-police that, they were talking about canceling Paw Patrol, which was like this kids show that had, a dog who was a cop in there. It's like crazy, and it's sort of simmered down a lot since that point, but was that kind of a hard time, the late 2020, summer 2020?
Very hard time. And it still is. Yeah, it still is. Last week, there were 3 officers that were just assassinated because they were cops. And, so it's still ongoing. It's just not as publicized right now. I get emails every day because I keep in touch with a lot of the national police organizations, and there's been more officers killed this year so far than last year, more attacks on officers. It's sad because are there bad officers? Yes, unfortunately there are. The ones in Memphis that just killed the guy. But guess what? They're all under arrest. They're all in jail, and they're going to go to prison, and that's where they deserve to be. And they're demanding that justice be done. Well, justice is being done, so why are you protesting now? It's they're incarcerated, they're going to prison, there's no doubt. So there's unrealistic demands, and it's not necessarily demands, it's an excuse to go riot, in my opinion, in a lot of the cases. There are the legitimate cases, and there's some that aren't. What's put out before the investigation is not what really happened. And so, unfortunately, we've got a lot politically with publicity and media and things that are just, I have to look through things online, and every time I look, I have to go research and find out whether it's even true or not. And there's so much false news that's going out that is scary. But there's so many people just buy into it hook, line, and sinker immediately. And that's where we've got to be self-accountable and think for ourselves and do the research. I had a buddy put something that was really political online, and he leans the same way I do, but I looked at it and went, wait a minute. And so I researched and found out it wasn't even true. And I had called him. I said, man, did you research this? And he says, well, no, I didn't take the time this time. I said, you should have, because you better look at this. Here's what I found. And that's what I'm discovering is we have to all be self-accountable on what we look at, what we believe, and make sure that we're not putting out propaganda, because that's what the world has become, is propaganda. But again, it comes down to every one of us individually, no matter what you believe.
Well, it would be good if, like, the media could sort of balance it. Like, if you do a negative story, why can't you do a positive story? Because there are a lot of police that are doing their job really well, and some of them are going beyond the call of duty and, helping in their communities. And you never see stories like that. And
unfortunately, it's like the old Don Henley song, Dirty Laundry. Bad news sells. And that's all we hear. There is a lot of good stuff going on out there by everybody. And by police officers, yes, every day. And I would say 90% of the officers out there are doing things the right way for the right reason. But we only hear about that 10%. And if you look at any profession, that's about the same percentage of the good people, good doctors versus bad doctors. I mean, more people are killed in malpractice instances through medical than, I think that's like the highest in the country of percentages of deaths or numbers of deaths. And you don't hear about that. But those doctors are dealt with, their licenses are taken away, and away they go. And unfortunately, this is the same thing. There's, I'm going to say, I'll bet it's not even 10%, but I'll bet it's less than 5% of officers that are truly criminal bad. Are there another 5% that make poor decisions? Yes. But you know what? What's funny is now they're lowering the standards because nobody wants to be an officer. And by lowering the standards, you increase that result of those that become bad. Like, I think that's probably what happened with those guys in Memphis. And you had a whole crew that was bad. I mean, they actually disbanded that whole specialized team. And, this was not the first incident, I guarantee. So why wasn't something done earlier?
What do you think of, like, officers had access to some of the things you've talked about, like meditation and sound therapies and different things, that the incidents of, sort of police brutality and things like that would go down?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of where we live in a number of communities. And the first community and the most important community to most people is their family community. And then you have your work community and your school community, and you have all of these different, you have your city that you live in, and you may have your church or your religious community. And so what happens in one community affects all the others. And that's why I start off with, if we can make the family community stronger and make the behaviors there work, that will ripple out to our work community. And that'll ripple out to our general community. And so if I go out and do it so it works, and I get one other person to do it so it works, and then it starts to spread, and pretty soon I think a lot of these problems will go away. You've got two opposing sides, and we don't hear about the 80% of people in the middle that agree on probably about 80% of everything. I mean, I have family members and I that don't agree at all politically, but as we discuss things, we agree on the majority of stuff. So I think that's America in itself. And so right now you've got the far 10% on one side and the far 10% on the other side. And that's who's all the news is about. And that's why it's all negative, because they won't give in. They're battling. So yeah, if we start in the middle and we start changing the way we live, I go out and I change the way people see what I'm doing, and they go, oh yeah, I kind of want that. So hey, here's how you do it. And then all of a sudden the bigger community starts seeing a difference. And that's kind of where I'm at, is that ripple effect. I can't change the whole world, but I can change it one person at a time, but I have to start with me. And then as I change, friends start to change. And as my friends change, my work starts to change. And as my work starts to change, the whole community starts to change. And then we can get back to what we want our lives to be.
So if people want to reach out to you, how can they get in touch with you?
I have a website. It's www.gdubauthor.com, and they can message me there. That will go, I get an email automatically, and then I can respond, and then they'll have my email. That's probably the best way. And if you want to see some of the things I've been talking about, my book is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I even found it at Walmart, which I didn't know. And I can't remember, a couple of places like Target, I think.
And your book, what is your book called?
It's called Bridging the Gap, and I left it out in my car. So, but yeah, Bridging the Gap, but you got to make sure to put my name in, because there's a lot of them called Bridging the Gap.
Yeah, and I'll make sure that I give links there because I think I got a link to your website already, and I'll make sure I get a link to your book too. So,
Okay. And the website link take you to the book also.
So is there like one final word you'd like to leave with the audience before we close out?
Yeah. Don't be afraid to open up, talk, and be a little vulnerable. People see vulnerability as a weakness, and it is not. It is actually a strength because we get to be the real us and allow others to see the real us. So open up and allow yourself to be vulnerable, and don't be afraid to talk. That's more than one, but that's a nutshell.
Oh, that was a good word. Well, thanks for coming on today. It was a pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you very much, Jay. I appreciate it.
I spent several years of my life stressed, anxious, and depressed. I needed to find something that would make my life work. For me, that was meditation. With meditation, I found the peace of mind that I was looking for. I found the happiness, and I found a way to improve every area of my life, my emotional life, my spiritual life, my relationships. I was able to discover things about myself. I can give you the tools to meditate. I will walk you through the process and hold your hand. Whether you're a beginner to meditation who's never meditated, or whether you're someone who's tried meditation and it just never seemed to work, we can make it work. Meditation is something that everyone can do, and I can show you how. Check out my course on meditation.